Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Riverdale. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, let's start off with the whole Betty thing. Obviously, she's been trying to keep track of her brother and everything, check Charles' movements, but nothing proves that he's actually the possible killer that she thinks he is, or at the very least, the very suspicious person that he is. So Betty goes to Chick and confronts him. And he talks about the fact that Charles murdered someone. They covered up the body, blah, 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 blah. So it's like, oh, your brother is a killer. He's done some shady shit. She confronts him and gets him to take a lie detector test, which he's passing it, and then it's like, what are you hiding something from us? It's like, oh, he's hiding something from us. What is it? And it's like, the fact of the matter is, I go to Narcotics Anonymous, and the fact of the matter is, it's held at my gym. And Betty's like, oh, Charles, I didn't know. He's like, that's what I've been hiding from you. I hope it was all worth it, Betty. That moment that happened, I was like, you're lying. Because we've got, as an audience, gotten a peek into his dark side already. Because the fact is, I still think, now, it ends up being debunked this episode, but my thought process was like, well, not completely debunked, but it's for different reasons. But part of me was like, oh, he's trying to get in good with the family because he wants to be a hero. Like the whole thing on Halloween, I was like, that had to be him who set that whole thing up, making it seem like it was Polly who did it, but just because he wanted to come off looking like the hero. And, he heard the recording and was like, yeah, or at least he was, he had bugged their phone, so he was hearing Betty be like, oh man, I'm so grateful for Charles and everything. He's like, yeah. So I thought it was admiration he wanted from his family. But then later on, it's just like, oh yeah, Chick is now talking about the body that you guys buried back in season 2. And I'm like, no one else jumped on that immediately to be like, don't you think the timing's a little interesting just because Betty visited him? Now he wants to drop that. It's like, no. I was like, so this has to be like I thought Charles must have forced his hand to be like, you do this for me. I mean, because the way Chick talked about it, it's like they were a thing. And even Charles was like, yeah, we were a thing until I came back home and Chick had killed one of his, one of the guys he was spending time with. And so after that, we were done. And that's what Charles claims. But now it's like, oh, everyone's grateful because Charles helped FP to make sure, okay, the body's there. We're going to file the paperwork to make it seem like, oh, his claims are unreal. But I just think it's interesting. And who's the first person who probably got this notice? It's like, oh, all of a sudden, Charles has got this notice and he probably gave it to FP. I doubt it went from Chick or to who's ever filing this paperwork to Charles. There might not even be any official paperwork. Chick probably never said anything to anybody. But once again, it's like, don't you think the time is interesting? He's had all this time he could have reported you about the body, but he didn't. He waited till now. That the timing's a little suspicious. But the reason why I was like, okay, so I wasn't 100% right, because it seems like they're both in this together, because it's like they're still an item. And so it's like, oh yeah, it is about gaining the family's trust, even Betty, because she was going to be the biggest hurdle, because she is basically the detective of the family. And the fact of the matter is, she usually can sniff out some bullshit, whereas no one else is willing to see it. She typically can. So I think she's still going to be the first one to figure this whole thing out. But what was interesting though is like, so the question then becomes like, okay, so why are they doing this? I guess it's Charles' way of hustling his family. Maybe he's trying to get back at them in some shape or form, because it makes you wonder, did Chick send him out there specific? Like, was Charles the one that suggested Chick pretend to be him and everything, back in season 2? Was that the whole play? Or is it actually something else? Is it a combination of like, oh, you want to get back at them, but at the same time you wanted to wreck them by getting so close to them and then breaking their heart? Like, because I think he hasn't this might be some part of him that is probably still broken from all those years of jingle jangle and stuff like that. Maybe he got clean and maybe he had a clean break from Chick, but now they're back in each other's life and Chick kind of tugs at that darkness, whereas like last season you had Hal kind of tugging at the darkness and Betty, to the point she would come and visit him on a regular basis. Maybe it's something similar to that. I don't know. But definitely there's some darkness in Charles that I think we're going to slowly but surely see kind of unveiled over the course of this season. So that's definitely interesting. And I keep bringing that up too. I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's almost, well, I guess because, Jughead's not around a lot, so Charles isn't making an attempt, but he is with, Betty, FP, and Alice. But what about Jellybean? Maybe Jellybean might be the outlier where she's like, I'm not really messing with him. He's my half bro, sure, but I don't care. we'll see about that. Because I just felt like he wasn't making much of an effort on his dad's side of the family. Like, he is with FP, and like I said, maybe because Jughead's away at school right now, that's the reason why things are kind of going down the lane they are, but there's that. Then we got to get into the whole Veronica situation this episode, because the family's all sitting together. I'm like, ooh, this is weird and this is awkward. It's like, yeah, don't worry, this is your only half-sister out there, Hermosa, so it's kind of like, But I did kind of like the united front of Veronica and Hermione being like, oh, this is actually in our name, so you two, scoot, get the hell out. So it is an interesting thing of like, oh, we're trying to go back to what their family is kind of best known for, which is rum, which is interesting considering, well, because we know the Blossoms are like the, what is it that they do again? I forgot. I'm blanking on it. Maple, right. They literally brought it up this episode. I could not remember that for the life of me, because it doesn't come up that often. Like, season 1's the only season to really ever focus on the fact is that that's the Blossom family trade of like Maple, but regardless, it's just interesting that we got another family kind of doing their thing of rum and stuff like that. So, well, I guess it kind of, every family's kind of got their thing, because even the Andrews family, like on Fred's side of the family, construction kind of runs in the family. I think it was Fred's dad's business, and then Fred took over. He wanted Archie to eventually take over at one point in time. So that could potentially be the route they go down that path. But, ultimately we'll have to wait and see. But nevertheless, it's this whole thing of, and it's almost like this sweet thing of like Hermione is working for Veronica's like, giving her mom a job at the speakeasy and everything. I'm like, oh, that's super cool. That's super nice. But then like, oh, here comes your dad and your sister. And so it's like, oh, give them the special booth 11. And I like the smile across Hermione's face, because she knows like, oh, yep, that's the enemy's table. So, I was wondering, I kind of had a feeling like Hermione probably wouldn't sit well with that, just because it is kind of, probably in her eyes, it might look like a demotion in a sense of like a demeaning position, even though there's nothing really demeaning about it. But like when you're kind of like queen bee for so long, and then you kind of trickle down to this, maybe you'll look at it as a demotion, but it's like, hey, we got freedom, but that freedom doesn't last long, because lo and behold, things get hot and steamy between Hermione and Hiram. And I know because this is Riverdale, stuff like that happens, but it's like, for some reason, when it's that moment in particular, I'm like, that feels like a very like Showtime or like Cinemax or HBO type of thing. Like that scene, it was just like, whoa, this is getting super hot and steamy. Holy shit. And I was like, oh, come on. But part of me is like, oh, Hermione, don't get seduced. Don't. You got your freedom and everything. And it's like, and she super gets seduced back in. And it's like, I even love Hiram. And it's like almost a twisted little game of cat and mouse almost. It's just like, whereas normal couples, tie each other up and stuff like that, kind of bondage being their thing. It's like us, it's like we put hits out on each other. I'm like, that is super fucked up when you think about it. That's really interesting. But sadly for Veronica, it's like, wait, what? You're getting back to what? For her, it didn't make any sense, because it's like, Mom, literally after everything we've been through, you literally went to jail for trying to kill him, despite all the terrible shit that he's done. The people he's definitely killed, that he's not suffering the ramifications for. And then like Hiram wants to twist it on her and be like, oh, the fact of the matter is, oh, Veronica, you'll always be the apple of my eye. The fact of the matter is, we know what this is really about. You're jealous of your sister. Don't worry, she'll never take your spite. She's like, are you crazy? Like, what makes you think this is about my sister? I'm not jealous. It's like, of course you are. It's like, so now I think Hiram is setting this up to be a situation where it's like both of his daughters are going to have to pine for his attention and love. It's like, and I think in the end, I think when everything's all said and done, Veronica's going to win. And he's like, oh my God, Veronica, you won. See how great. But now it's the whole thing of like, now Veronica's being put in that position where she's kind of having a tug between, obviously her freedom, but also I think slowly but surely, like Hiram is trying to pull her back into the family, just like he did Hermione. But the thing is, it's not going to be as easy, because at the very least, Hermione and Hiram have history. Not unless Hermione is playing a long game. We'll see. But even Hermosa is kind of playing her own part in all of this too, because she's basically been like, the fact of the matter is the story of her, Hiram and her mom. And the fact is, it's like, oh, and Veronica's like, oh, so he left your mom high and dry. And it's like, oh no, on the contrary, what he did was he took care of us until the day she died, and then took care of me, so kind of showing like, oh, don't get it twisted to think your family's special. You could probably even setting up the argument that, oh, he cared more for us, even when he was with your mom, he was still loving and caring for my mom. Even when he was caring for you, he was caring for me. So, but I think it's meant to create, I mean, it definitely seems like by the time the episode's set up, because obviously like, oh, what was once that picture of Veronica is now a picture of Hermosa, and she's like, oh, he says that I'm his, the apple of his eye. She's like, of course he did. I was going to show up to this sham of them renewing their vows and everything, but it's like, no, I'm not budging an inch. I'm not giving up my stake in this family. Basically, middle fingers to everybody, which Hermosa, I guess, is looking for the challenge of like, or maybe in her mind, it's like, oh, it's going exactly how Daddy planned, because obviously, Hiram is the master manipulator. Because, I mean, even to the point that, tying this into Archie's story, that's why Archie didn't even want to take the check from him, which obviously I think there was some sincerity with Hiram, because we saw like him being like, because he paid for everything when it came to Fred and everything, because it's like, because despite their differences, even he can, because he is the villain he is, can even be like, honestly, that, even though we crossed paths because we're enemies, the fact of the matter is that dude, Fred, he was a pretty good dude, so I think that's what kind of, but it puts him in this interesting position, because it's like, it's hard to say whether his sincerity is sincere, because even Archie's like, thanks, but no thanks, because even if you're giving me a blank check, the fact of the matter is nothing is for free when it comes to you. There's always some condition for anything you receive. So that's why I'm like, was that him coming out of his good nature? And hey, it might be a thing of like, it might be half and half. Maybe it starts as a good gesture, but then eventually he's like, you know what? I kind of laid the groundwork, so eventually I'm going to come after you to kind of do something for me. I mean, to be fair, Archie's literally been down this road before, and it heavily screwed him over. So obviously he's not going down that path again, especially because he's trying to honor his father by doing good. And it's like getting in bed with Hiram Lodge again would literally go against what my dad would want. It's like, so like Hiram represents everything my dad's kind of against, would have been against and is against, so. And since I did bring up Archie, let's shift over to his side of things in this episode, where obviously, it's actually kind of this sweet thing of like, obviously he does his vigilante thing, but then he comes in as Archie to kind of help. He brings in FP and his mom, and they end up kind of giving these kids a second chance. Even at one point, we see one of the kids he's helping out is working at Pops, and it's like, oh, the sweet moment of like, oh man, there's this whole thing of like, Archie's doing good, man. He's saving, one kid at a time. He's saving, Riverdale in a sense. So it's pretty nice. But obviously Dodger doesn't appreciate that. So, and then it turns into this thing of like, okay, so why do these kids work for Dodger? It's like, well, they get benefits. It's like, well, the fact of the matter is, well, because obviously they're in a situation of they can't serve any hard time because they're minors. So they'll go to juvie for a little bit. But obviously juvie is something, it's like, oh, Archie doesn't want to go down that route because him and Mad Dog were in that situation, and they know how dark that could get, especially if the wrong person is kind of overlooking everything. So there's that. But also it's like you're endangering your future, because like you start down like this path of like, okay, it's nothing, but eventually you get pushed further and further to do more and more things, and eventually it's going to cross the line where it's like, oh, you're not just going to go to juvie. It's not going to be a slap on the wrist. You're going to end up doing some hard time, and then you become, and it's something that, Jughead was talking about in the voiceover of like how like, oh, this is, you get tossed into the system, and once you're part of the system, there's a hard way to kind of break yourself out of that, just because it's like, this is the life you live, and it just kind of limits your chances and stuff like that. But Archie's trying to help with that, and obviously we see that, but for these kids, they just see the benefits, because it's like, oh, we get arcades and pizza, or they run some stuff for them, do stuff. It's like, yeah, that's no biggie. I mean, they're kids and they're young and they're like naive and be like, oh yeah, this is the dopest stuff. But it's like, that outweighs, yeah, you get this dope stuff, but the fact of the matter is you're basically ruining your lives by kicking it with Dodger. And Archie's attempts, with Veronica, they're able to bring in a whole bunch of arcades as well as food to kind of tempt the kids away from Dodger, which is obviously taking a huge dent into his business. And then obviously when Dodger shows up, it's like he confronts Archie because he knows that Archie is the dude in the mask. So it's like, oh, I know it's you. I just needed confirmation. And the thing is, FP can't do anything because all the evidence falls on the kids and none of it falls on Dodger. He's actually really good at doing this, which I'm also surprised that in some shape or form, Hiram and Dodger haven't crossed paths. I mean, that might be a secret connection that we're not aware of, because I mean, Hiram seems like he's trying to keep things on the up and up. I mean, he's in a position where it's like, he even brought up, it's like, we're making a good amount of money on the prison. So everything is good on that front. And then also, getting back into the rum business, what their family's kind of, best done. I wonder if he referencing specifically, I mean, I guess he would have to be specifically referencing the Luna family, that side of his family that he kind of cut ties with, or at the very least, when he changed his name to Lodge and everything, which I'm wondering, is that going to turn into anything later on? But, in the grand scheme, we'll have to wait and see. But getting back to Archie, he ends up turning to the one person he probably shouldn't turn to in this situation, and that's Hiram. And even Hiram's like, oh, the fact of the matter is, you're probably asking me to do a little harm to this guy, but it's like, I can't do that. Which is like, it's funny you say that, like all the terrible shit you've done, and you're trying to be like, but I guess for him it's like, well, he literally can't do anything bad right now because he's literally under a microscope. But later on, Archie and Reggie find him, Dodger looks pretty messed up, wrapped up in the carpet. And it's like, oh, is he dead? But it's like, no, he's alive. But now, despite, it doesn't matter who actually did it, Dodger's most likely going to blame Archie for it, to be like, they're trying to besmirch Archie's name to kind of get him back for it. But my brain is, I don't think it was Hiram either. But that might be the thing of like, Hiram's like, oh, that's what you wanted. But it's like, no, you said you weren't going to do it. Well, I did it. So now putting Archie in that unfavorable position, or at the very least, but I'm thinking what is really going to be, it's going to be one of the kids beat him up and did that. And now it's like, oh, because he's quote unquote an upstanding citizen, because none of the terrible stuff that he's done falls back on him, so it looks like he's clean. And so any person who did this to him out of retribution is going to get penalized for it. So it's going to be the whole thing of like, he's going to get away scot-free, and someone else's life is going to be thrown down the trash because of him. And it's like, he's not worth that. So I think that's the route things potentially will go down. We'll ultimately have to wait and see, because I almost skipped over it too. The reason why Archie turned to Hiram in the first place was because he believes Dodger and his people shot up his place. And it's like, my mom was there. She could have been killed, So that's why he was willing to go to such an extreme measure, like going to Hiram, even though he decided not to earlier. But part of me wonders, like, I would think that it was Dodger, because I'm about to say, like, not unless it's, like that said, not unless there's some secret connection between Dodger and Hiram that we're just not aware of yet. But we'll have to wait and see. So there's that side of things. Then there's things with Cheryl, because Cheryl's dealing with this whole, Julian situation of like, okay, so there's this possessed doll. She's even worried about leaving the twins and her Nana Rose there alone, but it's like, oh, it's all good. Puts, Circle of Salt, Supernatural 101. And I mean it literally by the TV show. If it wasn't for the TV show, I wouldn't know half the stuff I know about the supernatural world. I mean, I don't know that I'm sure that pulls from a lot of myths and lore and stuff like that, but that's like supernatural to TV show. That's 101. Salt blocks out malevolent spirits and stuff like that. But regardless. Well, that and iron hurts him as well, but regardless. But it turns out one of the kids choked on, I forgot what it was exactly, but now it's the whole thing of like, okay, so now she's thinking like, oh, Julian, because like in her dream it's like Julian needs a body, so maybe that was that, or maybe it's just to cause mischief and hurt people. Regardless of the whole situation, she's thinking like, okay, the doll ended up getting out. And then when she finds it, it's in Jason's lap. It's like, okay, so what's up with this? I wonder, and the fact is, it does seem like it is hinting that the fact is that there really is a whole Julian situation, that she did have a third, that they were originally triplets, which is kind of sad and messed up in the sense that both your siblings died. Obviously, you absorbed one of them, but obviously, Jason died. So it's kind of like, it adds an extra layer of sadness to the whole situation. But getting into it, now she also has family showing up because they want to sell the business. And I was like, you picked an interesting time to do that. But they reference the fact it's like, well, the maple business isn't making the money like it used to. Hasn't for many, many years now. Well, Cliff is gone and your mom is in the wind. So there's really no one at the forefront of all of this, which Tony brings up a point of like, hey, we can get away from Thistle House. We can sell all of this, because and we can have a place of our own, because like there's too many memories. Like Thistle House is connected to everything from Jason's murder to her dad's quote unquote suicide and everything associated with her mom and all the plus of the stuff, she was up to, being behind literally everything, so, but obviously she doesn't want to do, the moment they bring up like, oh, we want to go to the chapel, it's like, oh, we pay our respects there. It's like, nope. Get the hell out of my house. So I was like, right, you don't want too many people to know. I'm surprised you were so okay with Tony knowing your dirty little secret about the whole Jason thing. But I guess in the long run, it's like, Tony loves you. You love Tony. So you're like, after everything we've been through, it's like, she's, legitimately further proof of just how ride or die Tony is, which is pretty dope, Cheryl's got a good woman by her side, I think that's pretty dope. But regardless. But then, like, later on, her uncle, because they want to basically try to, like, oh, we'll get you committed. The moment they were saying that, which is like, I love that that's a thing. I'm like, oh, we're trying to get you committed. It's like, her mom did that to her at every opportunity she could, which is kind of, shitty. And it's just kind of, it sucks because it's like, that's always going to sadly be thrown something. Like, yeah, Cheryl, she's a little out there, but does she deserve to be locked up? Hell no. I mean, to be fair, when you look at how screwed up that family is, in many different regards, and truth be told, it doesn't just stop with, because obviously let's not forget the Blossoms and the Coopers were at one point in time the same family. So it's like that crazy and messed upness kind of runs very deep. It's just my whole point. But nevertheless, so, obviously she doesn't want, the rest of the family to find out about like, oh yeah, I'm keeping my dead twin brother's body in the in that chapel, and lo and behold, her uncle sneaks in and sees that, and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna have you committed, or maybe I'll deal with you right now." I'm like, "Yep, that was." And then Tony knocks him out, and most likely kill him because we see blood trailing. And I'm like, "Okay, so what a interesting web we weaved." And then there's the whole situation of, well, while that's all happening, I didn't take notice. I should have taken more notice, but. Wasn't the doll back at the end of the episode? I don't remember. What I mean is in that scene in particular, because remember the last time we saw it, she had put it underwater and put a brick on it. I guess she was trying to drown the spirit. Or maybe they put the doll back because they're like, oh, all the evil is gone now. But it's like, maybe it isn't, because the fact of the matter is stuff is still happening. The fact this thing transpired like that. Tony killed him, but it was in self-defense. So it's like, okay, so now what we got? Not unless he's not actually dead, but he was bleeding a lot. So part of me wonders, is he actually dead? Because I don't know. I think either way they're kind of screwed because now, like, obviously, Cheryl's going to do whatever she can to protect Tony. So they're going to be covering that up. And obviously her aunt's like, oh, have you seen him? And it's like, no, if you need to come search this place, you need a warrant to kind of look around. So that's going to turn into a whole thing, getting the authorities involved. So I'm interested to see where things kind of take a turn for Tony and Cheryl. And then there's the whole situation with Jughead, which he learned some very interesting things in this episode. We learned that basically he takes the message that his grandfather had left him in one of the books of like, don't let anyone take something from you. And then he starts looking at the books, that they're studying, those like well-known novels, and he starts piecing together stuff. He looks at like the tone, the words that are used and stuff like that. And he starts to believe, because they were believed that the same person wrote books 1 through 5 before passing on the pen name and stuff to another author and whatnot, obviously like the tradition. But Jughead is under the impression that no, the same person didn't write 1 through 5. The same person wrote 2 through 5, but the first one he believes was written by his grandfather, but obviously you need evidence. But then all things tied to his grandfather's work no longer was at the school anymore. So they look at stuff at Riverdale and they find a book he had written years before that is very similar to the first book. So it's like, okay, so there's definite proof that my grandfather wrote it. And now it actually makes a little more sense of why he probably spiraled into not being the good father he was, why he was drunk, why he, hit, why he was, an abusive drunk and everything. It was probably because for him, his entire life's work was taken from him. I mean, it doesn't excuse it, but now we kind of have a little more insight. And now I think for Jughead, that means a lot because obviously it's something his dad's not willing to talk about. But now kind of getting to understand his grandfather a little more, it changes a lot, kind of understanding like why you got pissed. Like your life's work was stolen from you and like you're never going to get the credit for it. And they took it from you. So that is enough to, it's actually interesting because you can make some real life correlations. Like a great example would be Crispin Glover when it comes to Back to the Future. Like how that character was handled. You know, his character from Back to the Future, it wasn't George McFly, like how that character was handled going forward. The fact is how they went about it, he didn't appreciate that on many different levels. And I've never really knew the true story of it until, like, you know, he talked about it a little while ago. He was very like showing and finally talking about his side of it. So I was like, okay, so it's a very similar thing in that regard. And it's, you know, it's understandable, you know? So I think that was kind of interesting insight. Obviously, Jughead brings this up to the dude in particular of like, oh, I know you stole this from my dad. And immediately, the fact is he started snapping and like, oh, I should turn you in and tell blah, 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 blah. It's like, but the fact is that you're even threatening him like this is further proof of, and I think even Jughead caught on to it. Like, the fact that you're threatening me means that there is truth to this. So the fact of the matter is you are, you know, hiding this whole truth. And it's like, because basically for him, he's like, it basically built his reputation. Because like, yeah, it's one thing. It's like, yeah, you wrote 2 through 5. Sure. I mean, who's to say he actually wrote 2 through 5? It could be a thing that was someone else's stories that once again, he stole and plagiarized, but he just took the recognition and name from. So it could be the thing of like, but at the same time, his legacy will be threatened because for him, it's like this entire school of Stonewall was built around him. He's like, it was built because of me. So it's like to have that legacy not only tarnished because it's like, oh, you took someone else's, you know, work. Even if you wrote these other books, you still took credit for someone else's work. That work 2 through 5 should have been someone else's work, but you took that legacy and made it your own. So there's implications there. Basically, his entire legacy would come crashing down. And obviously, Jughead brings this to Chippins, his teacher, Sam Witwer's character, and, you know, it's like, oh, we'll handle this. But then he shows up and he's kind of a little sick or whatever. And I'm like, at first I was like, they poisoned him and he doesn't know it. But it's like he felt guilty. He was just saying like, I'm sorry, Jughead. And then he jumps out the window and kills himself. And then immediately, like, Jughead's like, call the ambulance or something. The other kids are sitting there. So it's kind of like showing you like how fucked up this school is. Cause it's just kind of like, I guess for them, they knew I think because it seems like they're getting 4.0s because it seems like it's the same circumstance around like how in colleges, which, you know, I know like crime dramas and like movies have kind of been wrapped around this storyline of like, basically if your roommate commits suicide or something like that, you immediately get an A, essentially was kind of like the whole thing, which is like, I get the sentiment behind it, but I just think that is kind of fucked up in its own, but you know, I'm not here to judge. It's just, you know, and it seemed like they kind of take it as like, oh, we get 4.0s now because our teacher decided to off himself. And it's just like, Jughead seems like he's the only one who's really concerned about it. And then it turns out DuPont, the dude who stole his grandfather's work, who he had confronted earlier, and now Chippins is dead. It's like, okay, so I guess it's a thing of like, DuPont has a lot of power and pull, so it is a thing of like, it's probably not just your reputation that was in danger. It's probably like, if you kept up with this, it would have had implications. Like, who knows, maybe some dirt that DuPont had on Chippins, that the reason why he'd rather kill himself than kind of get in the middle of all of this. Even though it seemed like he was willing to, but that's actually, I would have never seen that story playing out the way it did, but now DuPont is going to be their teacher, which obviously means hell for Jughead because he's already got a target on his head because of this whole situation, and the guy's not going to listen to him, so any fair shot that Jughead might have had was just simply from Chippins, and obviously like all the other like kids in that seminar are all gunning, you know, it's kind of, kill or be killed. It's very like survival of the fittest like mentality, but it's also because it's even worse in this case because Jughead is even more so an outsider. They're at least a clique of like, oh, we're preps, we're the ones with power and position, but you know, more so Brett, but still like I think everyone else falls into that too. So I'm assuming that this is going to tie into Jughead supposedly dying, which maybe this whole situation is a cover up. Maybe Betty, Veronica, and Archie are working with FP because they're helping cover stuff up to kind of reveal some heinous plots, so they fake Jughead's death. Maybe that's what this is supposed to be about, what it's supposed to insinuate. Maybe, maybe not. We'll ultimately have to wait and see where everything goes, but things are definitely getting interesting in that side of things, of just like the developments and what that means going forward. Because you would assume this would mean like Jughead's got to go because he's one of the few people around that knows the truth. The other preps, they're not going to care as much as long as, and they'd probably even work alongside with DuPont if it means kind of bettering their position if they get something out of it. So like I said, it seemed like some of them might have been cool, in particular Donna, but now you're kind of like, maybe that's not the case. There's still the whole Moose thing. It's like, oh, he went to military training, but maybe there's more to that. There's so much to break down about that. And I'm so curious to see, you know, where they take all of this going forward into the next episode. But really, that's what I want to talk about. To the next one, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.